Chapter.
The Bookwalker is an adventure game about making few but tough choices, trying not to cry about the fate of fictional characters, and reading only the final chapter of cheap genre novels. None of those things it does perfectly, but the mood and mystery make it a worthwhile game anyway. The Bookwalker is a lot like one of those books that Etienne, the protagonist, explores all throughout the story, an act that the game wastes no time comparing to the player's visits into Etienne's world. Etienne's trips to the worlds of the books rarely end well for their characters. That is because Etienne is first a thief and worst a writer. In the Bookwalker, writers can create worlds with more than just their pen. They build them like one would tend to a garden, giving shape to their characters like bringing up their children. The temptation of mixing reality and fiction, as well as the fear of losing yourself in the books, are what makes writers like Etienne so cynical towards their characters, although Etienne is an especially difficult sort. As for the other source of Etienne's disposition, he's given up on his writing job to focus, momentarily, on stealing artifacts from books. He's a thief, though not entirely out of his own will. He's on a writer's equivalent to house arrest, deprived of his ability to write, and only able to slightly influence the books he dives into. During his first adventure, while on his way to retrieve a potion of immortality, Etienne meets a certain out-of-place character. A talking kerosene lamp, built of industrial bronze or copper, is bound to catch your eye when you're in a druid's ancient subterranean lair. Roderick, the lamp's name, was brought here by another Bookwalker, presumably a thief and presumably dead. From this point on, it will be carried by Etienne.
Is it hidden?
From this point on, the game follows a similar structure. Each day, Etienne wakes up, picks up the book he stole to delve into, and dives in. Every time, he's thrown right into the heart of the problem. A book about a workers' uprising against an automated factory starts right as the rebels storm the building. The desert world of Heart of Sound is thrown into existence right as the vital weather control device is lost. Etienne's exploration of the world always follows the same structure, but that's hardly surprising. He's a thief, and his methodical approach to what is effectively his job shows that very well. He's not here to explore the world, to engage with the story, or to help the characters. He just wants to steal whatever mixture of magical artifact and impossible technology his target appears to be this time, and get back to his reality as soon as possible. The books themselves have a lot more in common than what they initially show. They all mix fantasy and modern technology, with sprawling factories themed after Nordic gods, and magic schools where the old wise headmaster carries a gun. A particular fascination is the presence of computers, in dark caves or ancient magic schools, in the dusty post-apocalypse, or in a retrofuturistic spaceship. Etienne will eventually operate a computer, to the confusion of his companion. Something else all books have in common is how they always cut to the chase, opening with an epic battle or the final twist, and always close with an anticlimactic early end, as Etienne reaches his objective and leaves the rest unfinished. But while the book's narrative is deliberately cut short, punishing players for losing themselves in their world, the same can't be said for ambience. The Bookwalker's soundtrack doesn't have any recognizable themes, not even in the main menu. A couple tracks you could generously call music, while the rest lives in the realm of ambience. Large pads and slow strings with few long piano notes mixed in, barely audible in a sea of reverb. Overall, it's an excellent soundtrack. Each world is associated with a single track, which plays continuously during Etienne's visit. On the one hand, this kind of soundtrack is the best choice for the job. Keeping the music low-key and putting ambience in the front seat is pretty much the only way to make a single track repeating for 30 minutes not incredibly annoying. But this is much more than a trick to make the music last longer. The game has so little time to drop you into the world, letting its soul sink into you before it suddenly rips you apart. This is the game's favorite trick, and the one-note soundtrack plays a fundamental part in it. It gives the feeling that, even if just for a few pages, we really understood this world. The bird's eye view camera works to the same effect, even if some areas aren't quite as good as the others. While obviously inspired by old-school computer RPGs, the environments have a distinctly artificial look. They remind me of Lego sets or a doll's house more than any real place. The characters look like toys, smashed together into a play by the writer, a metaphor that I'm sure isn't lost on the developers. While those places don't seem real, with sections of the dioramas blacked out of existence and unnatural, moody lights coming off of every window at once, they are occasionally striking. Quality is generally pretty high, production values are solid all throughout, and most every room is at least somewhat inspired, but there's no comparison to the rooms where the game really delivers. Those are some of the best areas I've ever seen in any RPG. And because the game keeps switching between different books and takes no time getting to the big standout moment of each story, so many of its rooms are what would be in a different game the one standout area or the final set piece. Fantastical machines that extend endlessly or mind-bending twists that recontextualize the rest of the world are around every corner. Each of the 6 books has at least one of those, and often more than that, and the game is just 7 or 8 hours long. During those scenes, the presentation of the Bookwalker is in a league of its own. I want to look at one of those moments more closely now. It's from the first book in the game, so I wouldn't consider it a major spoiler, but you do you. A Drop of Infinity is the story of an alchemist's unscrupulous quest to reach immortality, or so it seems at first. When Etienne enters the book, the alchemist's dungeon is a dead place. There's no hint of the potion we're looking for, nor of its creator. Walls and cages are run down, every corpse is reduced to bones. What little writing remains hints towards a secret experiment, perhaps related to that potion of immortality. Then, right as we're about to meet another living person, the lights come up. The Alchemist's Lair is a farce, a stage put onto another stage, a trap set for the alchemist himself. Having been brought back from the Middle Ages, this lair is his prison too. Forced to work on a potion of immortality for a modern corporation he has no way of understanding, detached from anything but his dungeon and the suffering he can create there, the alchemist doesn't surrender. He wins over a computer and a gun, convincing the company he needs them for his research. He uses the first to find the grave of his ancient lover, and the latter to shoot out the entire building. He moves towards the historical graveyard, convinced he can resurrect his love. In the finale, with the alchemist heavily injured as the result of a car chase with Etienne, Roderick, our companion, gives us a choice. He suggests we split the potion, letting the alchemist keep half. He's heavily injured, he won't have the time to brew another one, he might not even survive long enough to reach the tomb. And yet, the question is still challenging. Does it even matter that the guy won't survive? After all, he's just a character. The moment Etienne stops reading the book, he will cease to exist. And besides, book characters don't suffer the way real people do. But once you start thinking about it this way, you realize that actually that's a great reason to give the guy a hand at the expense of Etienne's paycheck. After all, Etienne is a game character. You might as well aim for the obvious happy ending and feel good about yourself, and if something happens to Etienne, that's fine. He will cease to exist the moment you stop playing the game. And besides, game characters don't suffer the way real people do. This is such a good question to ask in a game like this, and the game loves to keep asking this question. The problem is that by book 2 or 3, the repetition is starting to wear thin, with no real choice of answer and a refusal from the game to elaborate on the question. Not that it actually matters, since the game's priorities start to change soon enough. To explain why, I have to spoil the entire thing. You've been warned, this is your spoiler warning. Leave now, Or better yet, don't. Let's talk about book crimes. A book crime, not its real name, is a crime a writer commits while inside a book. It's usually punished with a few years of mandatory writer's block, courtesy of some special shackles. The standard punishment is around 2 years of hard labor, though what hard labor means in this case isn't very clear. A friend of Etienne convinced him to take part in a dangerous job that didn't end well for the two. The friend got 5 years of hard labor, Etienne got 30. Convinced he wouldn't survive his sentence, Etienne decides to risk it all to regain the ability to write, resorting to the help of a smuggling network of book artifacts. As we learned in the first book, stealing the items that an entire fictional world relies on tends to mess with the lives of its people quite a bit. Books 2 to 4 follow in the direction of the first, with plenty of violence directed at adorable semi-sentient robots and the confused inhabitants of a magical school. Whenever we get the option to do good, it always comes at the expense of our own resolves. Avoiding a gunfight in the finale of the third book means bringing home a broken magical wand. Snatching Thor's hammer in the second requires killing a lot of adorable and oblivious robots. Mind you that neither of those books let you choose how the story ends. There is no variation in the finale. Etienne always breaks the wand, and he always takes the hammer back home. What variation is in the game amounts to a couple of subplots in the magical school, saving 1 or 2 lives in the 5th book, and maybe helping some struggles in the last one. I like this fine enough, though maybe I should say that I understand the logic behind it. The option to do good is given only when the story could benefit from having that choice, since given the option, players would ruthlessly maximize the ratio of good deeds to story progression, smoothing Etienne's arc down into a straight line towards the good ending. The 4th book is a weird one, but it's important to the story. It brings Etienne from his lowest point at the end of the magical school to the height of his career as a thief. It's the worst book by far, set on a spaceship powered by fate that is also styled after the Knights of the Round Table. The target this time is the Sword Excalibur, if you can believe it. This book's greatest sin is that it focuses on puzzles and horror more than mystery, but the system doesn't really accommodate for either. It's also the point where the combat system starts getting more complicated while still struggling to justify its existence. The next book is where things really pick up. With just 2 jobs to go, Etienne is in high spirits. Then he's plunged into Timeless Mansion, a book of his own creation that was changed beyond recognition once Etienne was arrested and the book given to a different author. From this book comes the cause of his arrest too. Amanda, the protagonist of Timeless Mansion, is strangely absent from this story, as her husband screams in anger at Etienne. But we've already heard of Amanda, or rather, we've heard her. She was the worried voice on the phone that called Etienne's apartment a few days ago. This is what got Etienne in so much trouble. He brought a character, his character, out of the book where she was created. Mixing fiction and reality so intrinsically is the worst crime a writer could commit. The two loved each other, but it didn't last long. That's what had Etienne so heartbroken at the start of the game. Not just the loss of his power to create, but of his love. Or maybe of his creation. I'm still not sure whether to read Amanda as an actual person, or if her disappearance is more significant if it represents Etienne losing his creativity, or the joy of writing. Regardless, when the book is over, Etienne is utterly destroyed. He barely seems to care that the next book will be the last, before fulfilling his contract and losing his shackles. The big twist, if you can call it that, is that there was never a contract to fulfill. The organization that promised to break Etienne's chain does not have the power to do so. The friend that introduced him to them turns out to have orchestrated his arrest in the first place. I like this twist, even if it's easy to see coming. What I don't like as much is that the organization's evil plan is an unfocused mix of messy metaphors and unclear in-universe motivations. If it's all literal, if this is a real criminal organization that sells the items gathered by imprisoned writers, then there's no twist. Except what, crime doesn't pay? If it's metaphorical, if stealing items represents taking inspiration, or a lack of artistic integrity or something else, then it's unfocused and, frankly, a bit lame. The last book is boring, so I'll skip to the end. After using the book's artifact to save the world, Etienne leaves the book only to be attacked by the organization he worked for. Realizing he's being played, he manages to dive back into the book and, after a fight, follows the gang into their hideout. There, Etienne learns that all his work was for nothing, calls the police on the mob boss and inadvertently brings the cops to his home. When he jumps out of the book, he finds his house swarmed by police. He tries to escape through a window, but only makes it a few blocks before being captured. I found the ending underwhelming at first, and I still do, but there are some very interesting questions in there about agency and metaphors, and the place that stories have in our world. I'll say this first. It's fine if a game doesn't end with a single clear message for the player. Stories aren't riddles that you crack open to uncover the author's message. Sometimes art just gives you some feelings and that's it. Maybe I feel let down because I thought this game would be something different. I imagined an actual mystery to solve, or some thought-provoking takes on stories and escapism, but honestly that's on me. Feelings are good too, I guess. That said, it's weird to even say it out loud considering what happens in the game, but the themes of the Bookwalker are surprisingly mundane. For example, stealing artifacts is quite heavily implied to be shorthand for plagiarism. That's what a certain pamphlet found in Etienne's apartment hints at. To quote the ad, "New book announcement. This battle will be the last. Ulrich the Giant and Gaston the Decapitator finally meet on the battlefield. Each one has total faith in his victory and each one possesses a mighty artifact. Can Excalibur take on the hammer of Thor? You will find for yourself in..." and so on and so forth. This understanding of stealing artifacts as shorthand for plagiarism gives new meaning to Etienne's refusal to engage with the books in earnest. He doesn't want to understand those stories, to be inspired by them, but only to pillage them of content for his own cheap knockoffs. Amanda, as we've already seen, isn't very interesting as a literal character transcribed into the real world, but as the reason for Etienne's downward spiral, or as the representation of what he lost by losing his ability to write, she becomes a meaningful piece of the story. In the finale, Etienne even resorts to fanfiction to get over his writer's block, the most mundane and human thing a writer could do. In one of the final scenes of the game, we actually see Etienne writing. He writes his companion, Roderick the Oil Lamp, back into a universe that suits him. He gives him the role of Watson, the prototypical assistant in one of Sherlock Holmes' novels, a role that fits him better than sitting lifeless beside Etienne's bed. He gives up on this last item, writes into a book that does not belong to him but where his friend can belong. Though he found solace in his fictional companionship, every story must eventually end, and this one must too.